The wheel splintered apart with a crack that echoed across the endless Texas prairie, and Catherine Harper knew immediately that she was in serious trouble. The wagon lurched violently to one side, throwing her against the wooden seat hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Her horse whinnied in alarm as the entire left side of the wagon dropped, the axle grinding into the dirt with a sickening scrape. Catherine managed to grab the reins and pull back hard, bringing the mare to a shuddering stop before the whole contraption could tip over completely. For a moment, she just sat there, heart hammering, trying to catch her breath. Then she climbed down carefully, her boots hitting the dusty ground with a soft thud. The July heat hit her like a physical blow, the sun beating down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. She walked around to examine the damage, already knowing what she would find. The rear left wheel had broken completely, several spokes shattered, the iron rim bent and useless. Catherine stared at it, feeling a cold knot of fear settle in her stomach, despite the oppressive heat. She was at least 20 miles from Fort Worth, maybe more. She had passed the last homestead hours ago, and she had not seen another soul on this lonely stretch of road all morning. It was 1876, and she was a 23-year-old woman alone in the middle of nowhere with a broken wagon, limited supplies, and no real idea how to fix a wheel, even if she had the tools to do it. She had been traveling to Fort Worth to meet her aunt, who had promised her work in her boarding house. Catherine's father had died 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts in this old wagon. Her mother had passed years before. She had sold everything she could not carry to pay off what she owed and set out with hope as her only real asset. Now, staring at the ruined wheel, that hope felt pretty thin. She looked around at the vast emptiness surrounding her. Rolling prairie stretched in every direction, dotted with scrub brush, and the occasional twisted mesquite tree. The road was little more than 2 ruts worn into the earth by wagon wheels. Heat shimmered in the distance, making the horizon waver like water. There was not a building, not a person, not even a wisp of smoke to indicate human presence anywhere within sight. Catherine took off her bonnet and used it to fan herself, trying to think. She could unhitch her horse and ride for help, but that would mean leaving all her worldly possessions unguarded on the side of the road. She could wait and hope someone came along, but she had not seen another traveler all day. She could try to fix the wheel herself, but she had no spare and no tools that would help. She was still standing there, trying to decide what to do, when she heard it. The distant sound of hoofbeats, growing steadily louder. Catherine's first instinct was relief, quickly followed by caution. A woman alone could not afford to trust just anyone who came along. She reached into the wagon and pulled out the small pistol her father had given her, tucking it into the pocket of her dress where she could reach it quickly if needed. The rider appeared over a low rise, materializing out of the heat shimmer. He was mounted on a tall bay horse, sitting easy in the saddle, with the kind of natural grace that spoke of years spent riding. As he drew closer, Catherine could make out more details. He was a young man, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a dusty brown hat. He wore typical cowboy gear, worn jeans, a faded blue shirt, scuffed boots with spurs, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. He slowed as he approached, raising one hand in a peaceful gesture. "Ma'am," he called out while still a good distance away, clearly not wanting to spook her. "Looks like you have got some trouble there." Catherine stayed where she was, one hand resting casually near her pocket. "My wheel broke," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I am afraid I am stuck." The cowboy brought his horse to a stop about 10 feet away and dismounted smoothly. Up close, Catherine could see he had a weathered, honest face, with gray eyes that held a mixture of concern and kindness. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and dust coated his clothes like he had been riding for a while. "Name is Caleb Morrison," he said, taking off his hat respectfully. "I have been working a cattle drive up north, heading back to my family's ranch near Fort Worth." He gestured toward the broken wheel. "That is a bad break. How long have you been stranded here?" "Just happened a few minutes ago," Catherine said. Some of the tension left her shoulders. There was something straightforward and trustworthy in his manner. "I am Catherine Harper. I was heading to Fort Worth myself." Caleb walked over to examine the wheel, crouching down to get a better look. He let out a low whistle. "This is not something you can just patch up. The whole wheel needs replacing." He looked up at her, squinting against the sun. "You are about 20 miles from Fort Worth, maybe a bit more. 25 from the last town going the other way." Catherine felt her heart sink. I do not have a spare wheel. No, I did not figure you did. Caleb stood up, dusting off his hands on his jeans. He looked thoughtfully at the wagon, then at his horse, then back at Catherine. Here is what I think. We can unload your wagon, take what is most important, and load it onto your horse and mine. I will ride with you into Fort Worth. It is not safe for you to stay out here alone, and trying to fix this here would take tools and materials we do not have. But all my things, Catherine protested, looking at the wagon. It was not much, but it was everything she owned. Once we get to town, we can arrange for someone to come back with a spare wheel and fetch your wagon and the rest of your belongings, Caleb said. I know a good wheelwright in Fort Worth, but first, we need to get you to safety. There is weather coming. He pointed toward the western horizon. Catherine looked where he indicated and felt her stomach drop. Dark clouds were beginning to build in the distance, still far off, but definitely there. She had been so focused on her immediate problem that she had not even noticed. As summer storms in Texas can be fierce, Caleb said. We have maybe a few hours before that hits, if we're lucky. More reason to get moving. Catherine knew he was right, but it felt wrong to just abandon the wagon. Still, what choice did she have? All right, she said finally. Let me get my most important things. Caleb helped her sort through her belongings. She had clothes, a few books that had been her mother's, some kitchen items, a quilt her grandmother had made, and the small wooden box that held her father's watch and her mother's wedding ring. They packed what they could into 2 bundles that could be tied behind the saddles. Your horse looks like she can carry you just fine, Caleb said, checking over Catherine's mare. She is a good, sturdy animal. Her name is Rosie, Catherine said. She has been with me since I was 16. Well, Rosie is going to get you to Fort Worth safely, Caleb said with a smile that made his whole face soften. Though you will have to ride astride if that is all right. We need to cover ground, and it will be faster. Catherine had ridden astride plenty of times on her father's farm, though it was not considered entirely proper for a lady, but propriety seemed less important than survival at the moment. I can manage, she said. They secured everything as best they could, covering the remaining items in the wagon with a canvas tarp and tying it down. Caleb helped Catherine mount Rosie, then swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease. We will take it steady but keep moving, he said. If you need to stop, just say so. But I want to get us as far as we can before that storm catches up. They set off at a steady trot, the broken wagon growing smaller behind them. Catherine felt a pang of worry leaving it there, but she pushed it aside. Caleb was right. Getting to safety was the priority. For the first hour, they rode mostly in silence, focusing on covering ground. The sun continued to beat down, and Catherine was grateful for her bonnet, though she could feel sweat trickling down her back. Caleb seemed unbothered by the heat, sitting easy in his saddle, occasionally checking the horizon behind them, where the storm clouds continued to build. So you are heading to Fort Worth to meet your aunt? Caleb asked eventually, breaking the silence. Yes, Catherine said. She runs a boarding house there. She has offered me a job and a place to stay. That is good, Caleb said. Fort Worth is growing fast. Lots of opportunity there, especially with the railroad coming through. What about your family? They are all in Fort Worth? My aunt is all I have left, Catherine said, and despite herself, her voice caught slightly. My father passed away this winter. My mother died when I was young. Caleb glanced at her, his gray eyes sympathetic. I am sorry to hear that. That is a hard thing to go through. Thank you, Catherine said quietly. We had a small farm, but there were debts. I sold it to pay what we owed and decided to start fresh in Fort Worth. That takes courage, Caleb said, starting over somewhere new. Or desperation, Catherine said with a wry smile. Though, I suppose there is not much difference sometimes. Caleb chuckled at that. No, I suppose there is not. He was quiet for a moment, then added, My family has a ranch about 5 miles outside Fort Worth. We raise cattle, some horses. My father started it 20 years ago when he and my mother came out from Missouri. It is not the biggest spread in Texas, but it is a good living. Do you have brothers and sisters? Catherine asked, glad for the conversation. It made the long ride feel less daunting. 2 younger brothers and a sister, Caleb said, and she could hear the affection in his voice. James is 22, Samuel is 19, and Emma just turned 16. They are all back at the ranch. I have been gone for 3 months on the cattle drive, so they will be glad to see me. Especially Emma. She's probably driving our parents crazy without me there to distract her. Catherine smiled. You sound close to them. We are, Caleb said. When you work a ranch, you depend on each other for everything. It makes you close, whether you want to be or not. Though I do actually like my siblings, so that helps. They rode on, the conversation flowing more easily now. Caleb told her about the cattle drive, about the long days in the saddle, and the challenges of moving several hundred head of cattle across miles of open country. Catherine found herself fascinated by his stories, the way he described the endless sky and the camaraderie of the other cowboys. There was something alive in his voice when he talked about it, a passion for that wild, free life. In turn, she told him about her life on the farm, about learning to manage a household after her mother died, about her father teaching her to shoot and ride, and all the practical things that women were not always expected to know. Caleb listened with genuine interest, asking questions, and Catherine found herself relaxing despite the circumstances. The sun began to sink lower in the sky, and the storm clouds behind them had grown considerably larger and darker. Caleb kept checking them, and Catherine could see the concern in his face. We are going to have to push a bit harder, he said finally. That storm is moving faster than I would like. They urged the horses into a faster pace, somewhere between a trot and a canter that ate up the miles but did not exhaust the animals. Catherine was a good rider, but she was tired and sore from the jarring when the wagon wheel broke, and she could feel herself starting to wear down. Caleb noticed. He kept glancing over at her, checking to make sure she was all right. We will stop soon for a break, he called over. There is a spot up ahead with some trees where we can rest the horses. True to his word, about 20 minutes later, he led them off the road to a small cluster of cottonwood trees that marked a dry creek bed. It was not much, but it offered some shade and a break from the endless prairie. Catherine dismounted stiffly, her legs protesting. Caleb was beside her immediately, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. Easy, he said. You have been in that saddle a long time. I am all right, Catherine said, though she was grateful for his steadiness. Just sore. Caleb pulled a canteen from his saddle and handed it to her. Drink, he said. We have enough water for now, and we will be in Fort Worth before tomorrow if we keep this pace. Catherine drank gratefully, the water warm but wet. She watched as Caleb tended to the horses, checking their hooves and offering them water from his hat. He moved with the kind of competence that came from years of experience, every motion efficient and sure. You are good with horses, she observed. I have been around them my whole life, Caleb said. My father always said that if you take care of your horse will take care of you. It has proven true more times than I can count. They rested for about 15 minutes, enough to give the horses a breather, but not so long that they lost too much ground. Catherine used the time to stretch her sore muscles and try to prepare herself mentally for more riding. She was not going to complain, not when Caleb was going so far out of his way to help her. When they mounted up again, the storm was noticeably closer. Catherine could hear distant rumbles of thunder, and the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain. We need to move, Caleb said, his voice tight with urgency. If that storm catches us out in the open, it could be dangerous. They pushed the horses harder now, cantering when the ground was good, trotting when it was not. Catherine focused on staying in the saddle and keeping up with Caleb, who led the way with obvious knowledge of the terrain. The sky behind them grew steadily darker, the clouds roiling and ominous. The first fat drops of rain started to fall just as the sun touched the horizon. Within minutes, it went from a sprinkle to a downpour, rain lashing down in sheets that soaked them both to the skin almost instantly. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by booming thunder that made the horses dance nervously. There, Caleb shouted over the roar of the rain, pointing ahead. I see lights. That is the Brennan place. We can take shelter. Catherine could barely see through the rain, but she trusted Caleb and followed as he led them toward what resolved into a homestead. A small house and a barn materialized out of the downpour, lamplight glowing in the windows like a beacon. They rode straight for the barn, and Caleb dismounted quickly, sliding the big door open. Catherine rode Rosie inside gratefully, and Caleb followed with his horse, sliding the door shut behind them. The sudden quiet was almost shocking, the roar of the rain muffled to a steady drumming on the roof. They were both drenched, water dripping from their clothes and hats. Catherine was shivering despite the warmth of the evening, and she could see Caleb was soaked through as well. Wait here, he said. I will go. Let the Brennans know we are here. They are good people. They will not mind us taking shelter." He ducked back out into the rain, running toward the house. Catherine stood in the barn, dripping and miserable, trying to catch her breath. Her whole body ached from the long ride, and she was exhausted. But she was also deeply grateful. If Caleb had not come along when he did, she would have been caught in this storm alone on the prairie with a broken wagon. The thought made her shudder. Caleb returned a few minutes later with an older man and woman, both carrying blankets and lanterns. "This is Catherine Harper," Caleb said, making introductions. "Her wagon broke down about 20 miles back, and I was helping her get to Fort Worth when the storm hit." "Poor dear," the woman said immediately, coming over to drape a blanket around Catherine's shoulders. "You are soaked through. I am Martha Brennan, and this is my husband, John. You are both welcome to stay until this storm passes. Come up to the house and get warm and dry." "Thank you so much," Catherine managed through her chattering teeth. "No thanks needed," John Brennan said gruffly. He was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes. "Anybody would do the same. Let us get you two inside before you both catch your death." They took care of the horses first, rubbing them down and making sure they were comfortable in the barn with hay and water. Then Martha Brennan ushered them all to the house, which was small but warm and welcoming. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of something cooking filled the air. Martha immediately set about finding dry clothes for them both. She gave Catherine one of her own dresses to change into, and John found some spare clothes for Caleb. They changed in separate rooms, and when Catherine emerged, she felt almost human again, though her hair was still damp and hanging loose down her back. Caleb looked different in dry clothes, younger somehow. His dark hair was drying in soft curls, and without the dust of the trail, Catherine could see that he had a smattering of freckles across his nose. He smiled when he saw her, a warm, genuine smile that made something flutter in her chest. "You look like you feel better," he said. "Much better," Catherine admitted, "though I think I will be sore tomorrow." "We both will be," Caleb said with a laugh. Martha insisted they eat, serving up bowls of hearty stew and fresh bread. Catherine had not realized how hungry she was until she started eating. The food was simple but delicious, and she cleaned her bowl gratefully. "So, you are heading to Fort Worth," John Brennan said as they ate. "What brings you out that way, if you do not mind my asking?" Catherine explained about her aunt and the boarding house, about her father's death, and her decision to start over. The Brennans listened sympathetically, nodding in understanding. "These are hard times for a woman alone," Martha said gently. "But you have got courage, I can see that. And it sounds like you have got a good head on your shoulders. You will do fine in Fort Worth." "I hope so," Catherine said. "She will," Caleb said with unexpected conviction. "Anyone who can handle their wagon breaking down 20 miles from anywhere with as much grace as she did will do just fine." Catherine felt herself flush at the compliment, looking down at her bowl. When she glanced up, she caught Caleb looking at her with an expression that made her heart skip. The storm raged outside for hours, lightning illuminating the windows and thunder shaking the walls. But inside, it was warm and safe. The Brennans were gracious hosts, and conversation flowed easily. John told stories about settling the land 20 years ago, about the challenges and triumphs of building a life from scratch in the wilderness. Martha talked about their children, all grown now and scattered to their own homesteads and towns. As the evening wore on, Catherine found herself watching Caleb more and more. The way he listened intently when others spoke, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the genuine kindness in everything he did. He had stopped to help a stranger without a second thought, had gone completely out of his way to make sure she reached safety, and was doing it all without expecting anything in return. In her experience, that kind of goodness was rare. Eventually, Martha showed them to rooms where they could sleep. The Brennans' children's old rooms, small but comfortable. Catherine climbed into bed, exhausted, but found herself unable to sleep right away. Her mind kept drifting to Caleb, to the sound of his voice and the steadiness of his presence. She barely knew him, had only met him that morning, but something about him felt significant, like their meeting was meant to be. She finally drifted off to the sound of rain on the roof, dreaming of gray eyes and kind smiles. Morning came bright and clear, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Catherine woke to sunshine streaming through the window and the smell of breakfast cooking. She dressed in her own clothes, now dry thanks to Martha's care, and made her way to the kitchen. Caleb was already there, talking with John over coffee. He looked up when she entered, and his face broke into a smile. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, as predicted," Catherine said with a rueful smile, "but otherwise all right. That was the best sleep I have had in days." Martha insisted they eat a good breakfast before setting out, and they did not argue. Over eggs and bacon and more of that wonderful bread, John gave them advice about the road ahead. "The storm will have made parts of it muddy," he said, "but if you stick to the high ground where you can, you should be fine. You are only about 10 miles from Fort Worth now. If you leave within the hour, you will be there by early afternoon." They thanked the Brennans profusely, and Martha packed them food for the road despite their protests. As they were preparing to leave, Martha pulled Catherine aside. "That is a good man," she said quietly, nodding toward where Caleb was saddling the horses. "The kind who does the right thing because it is right, not because there is something in it for him. Those are rare." "I know," Catherine said softly. Martha smiled knowingly. "I thought you might. Just wanted to make sure you noticed." They set out under a blue sky washed clean by the storm. The prairie looked different in the morning light, greener and fresher. Birds sang in the brush, and the air smelled of wet earth and growing things. The ride to Fort Worth was easier than the desperate rush before the storm. They rode at a comfortable pace, stopping once to rest the horses and eat some of the food Martha had packed. They talked easily, the conversation flowing naturally from one topic to another. Catherine found herself laughing more than she had in months, Caleb's dry sense of humor catching her off guard. "So, when you are not rescuing stranded women, what do you do for fun?" Catherine asked at one point. Caleb grinned. "Rescuing stranded women is my primary hobby, actually. Very time-consuming." Catherine laughed. "I am sure you must be exhausted." "It is a burden I bear," Caleb said solemnly, though his eyes were dancing with amusement. "But someone has to do it." "Well, I appreciate your sacrifice," Catherine said, trying to match his tone, but unable to keep from smiling. They crested a rise, and suddenly Fort Worth spread out before them. It was larger than Catherine had expected, a bustling town with wide streets and buildings that looked new and raw. She could see the railroad tracks gleaming in the sun, cattle pens near the station, people and wagons moving through the streets. "There it is," Caleb said, "your new home." Catherine felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was it, the start of her new life. And yet, looking at the town, all she could think about was that once they arrived, Caleb would help her find her aunt, and then he would go home to his ranch, and she would probably never see him again. The thought sat heavy in her chest, surprising her with its weight. They rode into town, and Caleb navigated the streets with ease, clearly familiar with the layout. "Where is your aunt's boarding house?" he asked. "On Maple Street," Catherine said, checking the address she had written down. The letter said it was near the Mercantile. "I know where that is," Caleb said. He led them through the busy streets, past saloons and shops, and people going about their business. Fort Worth was alive with energy, the kind of place where things were happening and would keep happening. Catherine could feel the possibility in the air. They found the boarding house easily enough, a tidy 2-story building with a painted sign that read Harper House in neat letters. Catherine's Aunt Beatrice came out onto the porch before they had even dismounted, having apparently seen them from the window. "Catherine!" she cried, hurrying down the steps. She was a woman in her 50s, with the same auburn hair Catherine had, though hers was streaked with gray. She wrapped Catherine in a fierce hug. "I have been so worried. I expected you 2 days ago." "I had some trouble on the road," Catherine said, hugging her back. "My wagon wheel broke. This is Caleb Morrison. He came across me when I was stranded and helped me get here safely." Beatrice turned to Caleb, her eyes assessing but warm. "Then I owe you a debt of gratitude, young man. Come inside, both of you. Catherine, you look exhausted. And where is the rest of your things?" They went inside, and Catherine explained about the wagon and the belongings they had left behind. Caleb promised to arrange for someone to go out with a spare wheel and retrieve it, and Beatrice insisted he stay for lunch as a thank you. The boarding house was clean and comfortable, with a parlor and dining room downstairs and rooms upstairs for boarders. Beatrice served them a good meal, while Catherine told her about everything that had happened. Caleb added details here and there, and Beatrice listened with the kind of focused attention that made Catherine remember why she had always liked her aunt. After lunch, Caleb said he should be going. my family will be wondering where I am," he said. "I sent word from the last town that I would be home days ago." Catherine felt her heart sink, but she forced a smile. "Of course. You have already done so much. Thank you truly. I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." "I am just glad I was there," Caleb said. He stood there for a moment, hat in his hands, looking like he wanted to say something else. Finally he said, "It has been a real pleasure meeting you, Catherine Harper. I hope Fort Worth treats you well." "Thank you," Catherine said softly, "for everything." Caleb nodded to Beatrice, put his hat back on, and headed for the door. Catherine watched him go, feeling an ache in her chest that she did not quite understand. She had known him less than 2 days. It should not hurt this much to see him leave, but it did. The door closed behind him, and Catherine stood there staring at it. Beatrice came to stand beside her, putting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "That is a good man," her aunt said quietly. "I know," Catherine whispered. "You have feelings for him." It was not a question, but Catherine answered anyway. "Is that foolish? I barely know him." "The heart does not always follow a sensible timeline," Beatrice said. "Sometimes it just knows." Catherine turned to look at her aunt. "But he is gone now, back to his life, and I have mine to build here." Beatrice smiled, a mysterious little curve of her lips. "Fort Worth is not that big a town, dear, and the Morrison Ranch is only 5 miles out. I have a feeling this story is not over yet." The first few days in Fort Worth passed in a blur of activity. Beatrice put Catherine to work immediately, teaching her the running of the boarding house. There was cooking and cleaning, laundry and marketing, keeping accounts and managing the boarders. It was hard work, but Catherine threw herself into it, grateful for something to keep her busy. When she was busy, she did not think about Caleb quite as much. The boarding house had 5 rooms upstairs, currently housing 6 boarders. There was Mr. Peterson, an elderly banker, Miss Sarah Crawford, a school teacher, the Donnelly brothers who worked at the railroad, and Mrs. Chen, a widow who did seamstress work. They were all pleasant people, and Catherine quickly learned their routines and preferences. On the 3rd day, a man arrived with her wagon. Caleb had been true to his word, arranging for a wheelwright to go out, fix the wheel, and bring back all her belongings. Catherine tipped him generously from her small savings, grateful to have her things back. She unpacked her mother's books and her grandmother's quilt, making the small room Beatrice had given her feel more like home. But she could not stop thinking about Caleb. She wondered what he was doing, whether he was settling back into ranch life, whether he ever thought about her. It seemed silly to pine for someone she had known for such a short time, but she could not help it. Those 2 days with him had felt more real and significant than months of her previous life. A week after arriving in Fort Worth, Catherine was at the mercantile buying supplies when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, if it is not my favorite person I have rescued lately." She spun around, her heart leaping, to find Caleb standing there with a grin on his face. He looked good, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes, his hat pushed back on his head. "Caleb!" she said, unable to keep the joy out of her voice. "What are you doing here?" "Buying supplies for the ranch," he said, gesturing to the list in his hand, "but mostly hoping I might run into you." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "Were you really?" "I was," Caleb said, his gray eyes serious despite his smile. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you, Catherine Harper, which is inconvenient when you are trying to focus on ranch work." Catherine laughed, feeling light and happy for the first time since he had left. "I have been thinking about you too," she admitted. "Good," Caleb said, "because I was wondering if you might like to have dinner with me. There is a decent restaurant on Main Street. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." "I would love that," Catherine said without hesitation. They arranged to meet that evening, and Catherine went back to the boarding house feeling like she was floating. Beatrice took one look at her face and smiled knowingly, but did not say anything, just helped Catherine pick out her best dress for the evening. The restaurant was indeed nothing fancy, but it was clean, and the food smelled wonderful. Caleb was already there when Catherine arrived, and he stood when he saw her, his face lighting up in a way that made her heart flutter. Dinner was wonderful. They talked for hours, the conversation never lagging. Caleb told her about his first week back on the ranch, about how his family had bombarded him with questions and his little sister Emma had made him promise to tell her all about the cattle drive. Catherine told him about learning to run the boarding house, about the boarders and Beatrice's patient teaching. I like Fort Worth, Catherine said. It is different from the farm, busier, but there is an energy to it that feels exciting. It is growing fast, Caleb agreed. Every time I come into town, there is something new. My father says in 10 years it will be one of the biggest cities in Texas. Do you ever think about living in town? Catherine asked, instead of the ranch? Caleb shook his head. I am a rancher through and through. I love the open space, the work with the cattle and horses. Town is fine to visit, but I could not live here permanently. I would feel too closed in. He paused, then added carefully, Does that matter to you? Catherine understood what he was really asking. I grew up on a farm, she said softly. I know what that life is like. The hard work, the isolation sometimes, the way you are dependent on weather and luck. But I also know the good parts, the beauty of it, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands, the closeness of family. I would not mind that life again. With the right person. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. I am glad to hear that, he said quietly. Because I think you might be the right person for me, Catherine. I know it is fast, and maybe that is crazy, but I have never felt this way about anyone before. It is not crazy, Catherine said, squeezing his hand. I feel it too. From that first day when you stopped to help me, there was something there, a connection. They stayed at the restaurant until it closed, reluctant to end the evening. When Caleb finally walked her back to the boarding house, they lingered on the porch, neither wanting to say goodbye. Can I see you again? Caleb asked. Soon? Yes, Catherine said. Please. How about Sunday? I could show you the ranch, introduce you to my family, if you are interested. I would love that, Catherine said. Caleb smiled, then leaned down and kissed her softly. It was gentle and sweet, and when he pulled back, Catherine felt like her whole body was glowing. Good night, Catherine, he said softly. Good night, Caleb. She watched him walk away, then went inside to find Beatrice waiting with a knowing smile and a cup of tea. Sunday came bright and clear, and Caleb arrived at the boarding house mid-morning, driving a small wagon. Catherine climbed up beside him, and they set out for the Morrison Ranch. The 5-mile drive passed quickly, filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. The Morrison Ranch was sprawling and beautiful, with rolling pastures dotted with cattle and horses. The main house was large and sturdy, built of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. There were several outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what looked like a workshop. Caleb's family came out to meet them, and Catherine felt her nervousness spike. But they were warm and welcoming, making her feel at ease almost immediately. Caleb's father, Thomas Morrison, was a tall man in his 50s with gray streaking his dark hair and the same kind gray eyes as his son. His mother, Margaret, was a small, energetic woman with a quick smile and capable hands. James and Samuel, Caleb's brothers, were both handsome young men who clearly looked up to their older brother. And Emma, the youngest, was a pretty girl with dark curls and an open, friendly manner. So, you are the woman Caleb could not stop talking about all week, Emma said with a grin, making Caleb flush. Emma, Margaret said in a warning tone, but she was smiling. It is all right, Catherine said with a laugh. I am glad he talked about me. They invited her to stay for lunch, and Catherine found herself enjoying the chaotic energy of the Morrison family. They talked over each other, teased and joked, but there was clear love underlying everything. It reminded Catherine of her own family when her mother was still alive, before loss had made everything quieter and sadder. After lunch, Caleb showed her around the ranch. They walked out to the pastures where the cattle grazed peacefully, visited the barn where several horses nickered hopefully for treats, and climbed a small hill that overlooked the entire property. This is beautiful, Catherine said, looking out over the land. You can see why you love it. It is home, Caleb said simply. My father built this from nothing. When he and my mother came here, it was just raw land. They built the house with their own hands, started with a handful of cattle, and grew it into what it is now. Someday, it will be mine and my brother's to run. That must be a good feeling, Catherine said, knowing you are building something that will last, that you will pass on to your children someday. Caleb looked at her, and there was something intense in his gaze. I hope so, he said quietly. I hope I get to do that. They stood there on the hill, the wind ruffling their hair, and Catherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This place, this man, this life, it felt like where she was supposed to be. As summer turned to fall, Caleb and Catherine's relationship deepened. He came into town twice a week without fail, and Catherine visited the ranch on Sundays. They went to church together, had dinners with both their families, and spent every moment they could together. Catherine fell in love with the Morrison family, almost as much as she was falling in love with Caleb. Margaret taught her Morrison family recipes and shared stories about raising 4 children on a ranch. Thomas showed her the account books and asked her opinion on business decisions, valuing her quick mind and practical nature. James and Samuel treated her like a sister, teasing but protective, and Emma declared Catherine her new best friend, dragging her into every activity and confidence. The boarders at Harper House got used to Caleb's regular visits, and more than one commented with a smile on the obvious affection between them. Beatrice watched it all with satisfaction, pleased to see her niece so happy. In October, Caleb took Catherine on a picnic by the river. The leaves were turning gold and red, the air crisp with the promise of winter. They sat on a blanket under a cottonwood tree, eating cold chicken and fresh bread, talking about everything and nothing. "Catherine," Caleb said finally, setting down his plate, "I need to ask you something." Catherine's heart started to race. There was something in his tone, a seriousness that made her pulse quicken. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. "I know we have not known each other that long," he said. "Only a few months, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Catherine Harper. I love your strength and your kindness and your laugh. I love the way you talk to my mother and tease my brothers. I love how you look at the ranch like you can see what it could become. I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Caleb, of course I will marry you." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. Catherine kissed him back, pouring all her love and joy into it. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling so wide it almost hurt. "I was so nervous," Caleb admitted with a shaky laugh. "What if you had said no?" "I could never say no to you," Catherine said, looking at the ring on her finger. "You are everything I did not know I was looking for." They decided to marry in December, giving them time to prepare, but not so long that they had to wait forever. The announcement was met with joy from both families. Beatrice cried happy tears and immediately started planning. Margaret hugged Catherine tight and whispered, "Welcome to the family, daughter." The next 2 months passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Catherine worked with Beatrice and Margaret to plan a simple but lovely wedding. Emma insisted on helping with everything, and Catherine was grateful for her enthusiasm. They sewed a wedding dress together, simple white cotton with delicate embroidery that Margaret showed them how to do. Caleb was building them a house on the ranch property, not far from the main house, but separate enough to give them privacy. He worked on it every spare moment, and his brothers helped. Catherine visited whenever she could, watching the structure take shape. It was not large, but it was well built and thoughtful, with a big kitchen because Caleb knew she liked to cook, and windows facing east so she would have morning light. In early December, a week before the wedding, Catherine was helping Beatrice with the boarders' laundry when someone knocked urgently on the door. It was Samuel, Caleb's younger brother, and he looked worried. "Catherine, you need to come," he said. Caleb was helping round up some cattle that got loose, and his horse spooked. He got thrown. Catherine felt her heart stop. "Is he all right?" "The doctor is with him now," Samuel said. "He is conscious, but his leg is hurt pretty bad. He has been asking for you." Catherine did not hesitate. She grabbed her shawl and went with Samuel, climbing onto his horse behind him for the fast ride to the ranch. Her mind was racing with fear, imagining the worst. When they arrived, she ran into the house to find Caleb in his bed, his face pale and tight with pain. The doctor was wrapping his leg, which was clearly broken, but Caleb's face brightened when he saw her. "Catherine," he said, reaching for her hand. "I am all right. Just a broken leg." "Just a broken leg," Catherine repeated, relief and exasperation warring in her voice. She took his hand, squeezing it tight. "You scared me half to death." "I am sorry," Caleb said. "Stupid accident. Horse got spooked by a rattlesnake." The doctor finished wrapping the leg and straightened up. "It is a clean break," he said. "It will heal, but he needs to stay off it for at least 6 weeks. No riding, no heavy work. Bed rest for the first 2 weeks, then he can start moving around with crutches. Catherine felt some of her fear ease. 6 weeks was a long time, but he would recover. That was what mattered. After the doctor left, Catherine sat with Caleb while his family hovered anxiously. "The wedding," Caleb said suddenly. "Catherine, I am so sorry. We will have to postpone." "Why?" Catherine asked. "I cannot even stand up," Caleb said. "I am not going to be able to stand at the altar." "So sit," Catherine said practically, "or lean on crutches. I do not care, Caleb. I just want to marry you." Caleb looked at her, surprise and love in his eyes. "You still want to go through with it, even with me laid up like this?" "Especially with you laid up like this," Catherine said firmly. "Someone needs to be there to make sure you follow the doctor's orders." Margaret, standing in the doorway, smiled. "I like the way she thinks." They did end up postponing the wedding, but only by 2 weeks to give Caleb time to heal enough to at least be up on crutches. Catherine spent almost every day at the ranch during that time, helping Margaret care for Caleb and finish preparing for the wedding. It was in those quiet days, sitting by his bed reading to him or talking about their future, that Catherine felt their bond deepen even more. Caleb at his most vulnerable, letting her see him in pain and frustrated, trusting her to be there. It meant everything. Finally, on a cold December day, they were married in the small church in Fort Worth. Caleb stood at the altar on crutches, his legs still splinted, but his smile was radiant. Catherine walked down the aisle in her handmade dress, holding a bouquet of winter flowers that Emma had somehow found, and she had never felt more beautiful or more certain. When the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Caleb balanced on his crutches and kissed her thoroughly, making the small congregation laugh and cheer. Catherine kissed him back, not caring who was watching, just happy to finally be his wife. The reception was held at the Morrison Ranch, with friends and neighbors coming from all around. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing, though Caleb could only watch from a chair, his broken leg propped up. Catherine danced with his brothers and his father, but she kept coming back to Caleb, sitting beside him, holding his hand. "I am sorry I cannot dance with you," he said at one point, frustration clear in his voice. "We have the rest of our lives for dancing," Catherine said, kissing his cheek. "Today, I just want to be with you." When the party finally wound down, Caleb's brothers helped him to the new house. Catherine had already moved her things in, and Margaret had made sure everything was ready for them. It was strange and wonderful to walk into their own home, to know this was where they would build their life together. Caleb sat on the edge of their bed, and Catherine knelt to help him with his boots. "I had plans for tonight," he said wryly. "They did not involve being an invalid." Catherine laughed softly. "We have time," she said. "And you are stuck with me now, Caleb Morrison. For better or worse, remember?" "Best decision I ever made," Caleb said, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her gently. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a happy one. Caleb's leg healed slowly, and Catherine took care of him with patience and love. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping Margaret with the endless work of feeding and caring for a ranch full of men. She learned to cook on a wood stove, to preserve food, to help with the calving and foaling when spring came. By February, Caleb was walking without crutches, though he still limped a bit. By March, he was back on a horse, though Catherine worried every time he rode out. By April, his leg was as good as new, and he was back to full ranch work. Catherine found her place on the Morrison Ranch. She kept house with a skill that impressed even Margaret, managed to gentle a wild young mare that no one else could get near, and became an integral part of the ranch's operations. Thomas started consulting her on purchases and sales, valuing her head for numbers. But more than that, she was happy. She woke up every morning next to the man she loved, spent her days doing meaningful work, and fell asleep every night grateful for the life she had built. In May, almost exactly a year after her wagon wheel had broken on that lonely stretch of prairie, Catherine realized she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said quietly. Caleb turned to her, his eyes wide. "What? Really?" Catherine nodded, smiling. "Really, I am pretty sure." Caleb let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms carefully. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Catherine, we are having a baby." "You are happy?" Catherine asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "I am thrilled," Caleb said. "I cannot wait to meet them, to be a father, to build this life with you." They told the family that evening, and the joy was universal. Margaret cried happy tears and immediately started planning. Emma was excited to be an aunt. Thomas shook Caleb's hand and told him gruffly that he was proud of him. James and Samuel clapped their brother on the back and teased him about being old enough to be a father. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Catherine continued to work as long as she could, only slowing down in the last months when she got too big to comfortably do everything. Caleb was attentive and worried, always making sure she was not overdoing it, and Catherine found his concern endearing even when it got a bit smothering. In January of 1878, on a cold but clear night, Catherine went into labor. Margaret and the midwife attended her, while Caleb paced anxiously outside with his father and brothers. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Catherine was sure she could not do it. But finally, as dawn broke, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Caleb Morrison, after both his grandfathers. He was small and red and squalling, and Catherine thought he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. When they finally let Caleb in to meet his son, he stood by the bed staring down at the tiny bundle in Catherine's arms with an expression of awe. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe he is ours." "He has your nose," Catherine said with a tired smile. "Poor kid," Caleb said, but he was smiling too. He reached out carefully to touch his son's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers curled around his father's finger instinctively. Caleb's eyes filled with tears. "Hello, Tommy. I am your father, and I promise I am going to do everything I can to be a good one." Being parents changed everything and nothing. The lack of sleep was brutal at first, and Catherine had never been so tired in her life. But watching Caleb with their son, seeing the gentle way he held the baby and the devotion in his eyes made every difficult moment worth it. Tommy grew into a bright, active child. He had Caleb's gray eyes and Catherine's auburn hair, and he was constantly getting into everything. By the time he was 2, he was toddling after his father around the ranch, insistent on helping with everything, even when he was too small to actually help. When Tommy was 3, Catherine found herself pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Margaret, after Catherine's mother and Caleb's. Sarah was quieter than Tommy, more thoughtful, with Caleb's dark hair and Catherine's green eyes. She seemed content to watch the world around her with solemn attention, taking everything in. The years passed in the way years do when life is full and happy. The ranch prospered under Thomas and Caleb's management. Catherine became known throughout the county as a skilled horse trainer, with people bringing their difficult horses to her. Beatrice visited often from town, and Catherine made sure to spend time helping at the boarding house when she could. Emma married a young rancher from a neighboring property when she was 20, and Catherine helped plan the wedding, just as Emma had helped with hers. James and Samuel both found wives eventually, and the Morrison family continued to grow. Tommy grew into a boy who loved everything about ranch life, who could ride almost before he could walk properly, who had his father's steady nature and his mother's quick mind. Sarah was gentle and kind, with a gift for healing. She collected injured animals and nursed them back to health, and everyone said she would make a wonderful doctor's wife someday. When she announced at 16 that she intended to be a doctor herself, not just marry one, Catherine supported her completely despite the raised eyebrows from some of their neighbors. When Tommy was 8 and Sarah was 5, Catherine gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Emma, after Caleb's siblings. The twins were a handful from the start, energetic and mischievous, constantly getting into scrapes, but they brought immense joy to the household. Thomas Morrison Sr. passed away peacefully in his sleep when he was 72, and Caleb took over full management of the ranch. It was bittersweet, the loss balanced by the knowledge that his father had lived a full, happy life and had gotten to see his grandchildren grow. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had built and planted a tree there that would grow for generations. Margaret lived another 10 years after Thomas, staying active and involved until the very end. She taught all her grandchildren to cook and sew and ride, and she never tired of telling stories about the early days on the ranch. When she passed, it was quietly, surrounded by family, and Catherine held Caleb as he cried for the loss of the woman who had welcomed her so completely into the family. The years turned into decades. Tommy grew up, and married a rancher's daughter, and they built a house on the far side of the ranch property. Sarah defied expectations and went east to medical school, becoming one of the few female doctors in Texas when she returned to open a practice in Fort Worth. The twins grew up wild and free, James eventually taking over a portion of the ranch, and Emma marrying a banker and moving to Dallas. Caleb and Catherine grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, faced losses and celebrated triumphs, built a life and a legacy together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Caleb gave Catherine a beautiful painted portrait an artist had done of the two of them. 25 years, Caleb said as they looked at it together, since I found you on that prairie with a broken wagon wheel. Best broken wheel in history, Catherine said, leaning into his side. His hair was gray now, and there were lines around his eyes, but he was still the same man who had stopped to help a stranger without a second thought. I think about that day sometimes, Caleb said, about what my life would have been like if I had taken a different road that morning, if I had missed you. But you did not, Catherine said, turning to look up at him. You found me, or I found you, or maybe we found each other. Best thing that ever happened to me, Caleb said, kissing her forehead. You and this life we built. Me too, Catherine whispered. Me too. They held a big party for their anniversary, with all their children and grandchildren there. Tommy came with his wife and 3 children. Sarah traveled from Fort Worth with her husband, whom she had met at medical school. The twins brought their families. The house was full of laughter and noise and love, 3 generations of Morrisons all together. As Catherine looked around at all the faces, at the family she and Caleb had created, she felt a deep sense of contentment. It had not always been easy. There had been hard years, droughts that threatened the ranch, illnesses that scared them, losses that broke their hearts, but through it all, they had had each other. That night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Caleb and Catherine sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. The same porch where Caleb had proposed, where they had rocked their babies to sleep, where they had planned and dreamed and built their future. Do you ever regret it? Caleb asked. Leaving the life you might have had in Fort Worth, your aunt's boarding house? Catherine thought about it, then shook her head. Not for a moment. This is where I was meant to be, with you. I love you, Catherine Morrison, Caleb said. Just as much now as I did that first day. Maybe more. I love you too, Catherine said. My cowboy who fixed my wheel and rode with me to safety. Though I think you did more than just bring me to safety. You brought me home. They sat there in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had shared a lifetime, watching the stars come out over the Texas prairie. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. A coyote called to the moon. The wind rustled through the grass, the same wind that had blown on that hot July day so many years ago, when a wagon wheel broke and 2 lives intersected. Years continued to pass gently. Caleb and Catherine settled into the rhythm of grandparenting and managing the ranch with Tommy's help. They took great joy in their grandchildren, spoiling them in the way grandparents do, teaching them to ride and rope and all the skills that made a good rancher. When Caleb was 62, he took a fall while working with a young horse and broke his arm. Catherine fussed over him the way he had once fussed over her during her pregnancies, and he grumbled good-naturedly about being treated like an invalid. But he also clearly loved her attention, the way she cared for him, and he healed quickly. They traveled a bit in those years, taking a train to see Emma in Dallas, visiting Sarah in Fort Worth, going to a big cattle exposition in San Antonio. But they always came home to the ranch, to the house Caleb had built them, to the land they loved. On a warm spring evening when Catherine was 68 and Caleb was 70, they received word that Beatrice had passed away peacefully in her sleep. Catherine grieved for the aunt who had given her a new start, who had welcomed her to Fort Worth and supported her marriage to Caleb. They made the journey to Fort Worth for the funeral, and Catherine was touched by how many people came to pay their respects to her aunt. Beatrice had touched many lives with her kindness and generosity. Standing in the church, Catherine thought about that young woman she had been, freshly arrived in Fort Worth, with everything she owned in a wagon, scared and hopeful, and not knowing what her future would hold. She wished she could go back and tell that young woman that everything would be all right, better than all right. That broken wagon wheel had led her to the greatest love of her life, to a family and a home and a legacy she was proud of. More years passed. Tommy took over more and more of the ranch management as Caleb slowed down, though Caleb still insisted on being involved in major decisions. Sarah's medical practice thrived, and she became known as one of the best doctors in Fort Worth. The twins prospered in their own ways, James expanding his portion of the ranch, and Emma becoming a prominent figure in Dallas society, while never forgetting her ranching roots. Caleb and Catherine became great-grandparents, holding the next generation of Morrisons with hands that shook slightly with age, but hearts that were still strong. They told their great-grandchildren stories about the old days, about coming to Texas and building the ranch, about a broken wagon wheel and a chance meeting that changed everything. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered again. It was a massive celebration, with over 50 people in attendance, all of them connected to Caleb and Catherine in some way. There were children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in-laws and friends, neighbors who had known them for decades. Tommy stood up to make a speech, his voice thick with emotion. "My parents built something remarkable," he said. "Not just this ranch, though, that is an accomplishment in itself. But they built a family founded on love and respect and hard work. They showed all of us what a real partnership looks like, what real love looks like. 50 years together, and they still look at each other like newlyweds. That is what I hope all of us aspire to." There was not a dry eye in the house when he finished. Caleb stood up, leaning heavily on a cane now, and pulled Catherine to her feet beside him. "I just want to say," he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "that every good thing in my life started the day I met this woman. She is my partner, my best friend, my love. Catherine, thank you for saying yes to a cowboy with a broken wheel and a hope. Thank you for stopping to help a stranded woman," Catherine said, her voice shaking slightly. "And for every day since." They kissed, and everyone cheered, and the party went on late into the night. Catherine looked around at all the faces, at the legacy she and Caleb had created, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, these people, this love. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible. As they got ready for bed that night, Caleb moving slowly with the stiffness of age, Catherine helped him the way he had once helped her during her difficult pregnancies and after she had given birth. They had spent 50 years taking care of each other, and she would continue to do so for as long as they had. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked as they lay in bed, his arm around her shoulders the way it had been for 50 years. "About how lucky I am," Catherine said. "About how that broken wagon wheel was the best thing that ever happened to me." "To both of us," Caleb said, kissing the top of her head. "I love you, Catherine. Always have, always will." "I love you too," Catherine whispered. "Always." They drifted off to sleep together, comfortable and content in the life they had built, surrounded by the love of family, secure in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. Caleb lived to be 78, active and engaged until almost the very end. He passed away peacefully one autumn morning, Catherine holding his hand, his children and grandchildren gathered around him. His last words were, "I love you," to Catherine, and she held him as he took his last breath, her heart breaking even as she was grateful for every year, every day, every moment they had shared. She buried him on the hill next to his parents, under the big Texas sky he had loved so much. The whole county came to the funeral, testament to the life he had lived and the man he had been. Catherine stood strong through it all, supported by her children, remembering not the sadness of his passing, but the joy of their 53 years together. Catherine lived 3 more years after Caleb, staying active and involved in ranch life, doting on her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She never remarried, never even considered it. She had had her great love, her soulmate, and that was enough for a lifetime. She passed away quietly in her sleep on a spring morning, 3 days after what would have been her and Caleb's 56th wedding anniversary. Sarah found her, peaceful and still, with a smile on her face. On her bedside table was the small wooden box that held her father's watch and her mother's wedding ring, and next to it, the ring Caleb had given her when he proposed by the river all those years ago. They buried her next to Caleb on the hill, overlooking the ranch they had built together. Tommy spoke at the funeral, talking about his mother's strength and kindness, about how she had built a life from nothing after losing everything, about how she had loved completely and raised her children with wisdom and grace. "My father used to say that the day he found my mother broken down on the prairie was the luckiest day of his life," Tommy said. But I think they were both lucky. They found each other when they both needed it most, and they built something beautiful together, something that will last for generations. The ranch continued to thrive under Tommy's management, passed down through the family as Thomas Morrison Sr. had always hoped. Sarah's children carried on her legacy of healing, several of them becoming doctors and nurses. The twins' descendants spread across Texas and beyond, but they all came back to the ranch regularly, drawn by the connection to their roots. And in the years that followed, when the family gathered on that hill to remember their ancestors, they always told the story of how it all began. The story of a woman with a broken wagon wheel, stranded 20 miles from anywhere, and a cowboy who stopped to help her. A chance meeting on a lonely Texas prairie that became a love story for the ages, a legacy that lasted for generations. The wheel that broke that hot July day in 1876 had led to a lifetime of love, a family that stretched into the future, and a story that would be told and retold around dinner tables and campfires for 100 years and more. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best things, that helping a stranger can change your life, and that true love, when you find it, is worth everything. On the hill where Caleb and Catherine were buried, their great-great-grandchildren played, not knowing yet the full story of the remarkable people who had made their lives possible. But they would learn in time. They would learn about the broken wheel and the cowboy and the woman who became the foundation of their family. They would learn about love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, about partnership and strength and the power of a chance meeting to change everything. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirits of Caleb and Catherine Morrison looked down on it all with satisfaction, knowing that the life they had built together continued on, their love echoing through the generations, as eternal as the Texas prairie where it all began.